Hello everyone, and welcome officially to this webinar on Skills Foresight. I'm Fatma Feki from the ITC ILO, and I'm pleased to facilitate this session today. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few technicalities so you know how to participate in today's session. So this webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available soon after we finish. You are listening in using your computer speaker system by default. To ensure a smooth running of the session, as I mentioned, please make sure your microphone is muted all over the presentation and use the raise your hand function for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So this session will include a presentation of approximately 30 minutes. And a Q&A session of 15 minutes, and then we will close for 5 minutes. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation using the chat function, which is the small bubble speech icon in the bottom of your screen. I will collect these questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Alternatively, you can write me privately at the end of the session during the Q&A session, and I will let you take the floor. Just please write me in the chat or raise your hand. So this being said, we can kick off the webinar, and I will start by thanking UNIMED very much, and particularly Sylvia, for this opportunity to share ILO's knowledge on the topic of skills and foresight and skills foresight. Sylvia, the floor is yours for a welcome word.
Thank you, Fatma. Thank you very much for your willingness in participating, accepting to do this webinar for our UNIMED members, our network. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Silvia Marchionne from UNIMED, based in Rome, for those who don't know, and I'm project manager since 2013. We have established with ILO this collaboration in the framework of Resume project, and we have developed this collaboration on topics of employability, skills development, learning methodologies, and technology innovation. Briefly, 2 words on Resume project. Resume is a co-funded European project of capacity building in the framework of Erasmus Plus program, which aims to foster entrepreneurship skills in the university system in 3 major countries, Morocco, Tunisia, and Lebanon. During the 3 years project, we have developed a university course on entrepreneurship skills. We have reinforced the skills of career center staff. And lastly, we have organized an international competition for university students with the aim to create their own business idea. Say that, I would like to give the floor to Fatma. She already introduced herself, so we can start our session. Thank you again, Fatma, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. So just a quick word about me. I work in the International Training Center of the ILO as a junior program officer. I work on learning innovation, the learning innovation program. This mainly covers technology enhanced learning, training of trainers, methodologies and technologies, all kind of new ways of doing learning, including mobile learning, user experience, and human-computer interaction. And for the past 2 years, I've been working on Foresight project for several ILO topics, including labor migration, social protection, and social and solidarity economy. I've already intervened in the Academy for Skills Development in our training center, and I was a resource person for the use of Foresight on skills development, and this is exactly what I'm going to try to do in this session. I'm going to try to share with you what the ILO has been doing on this topic, and also share some knowledge that has been collected, and of course follow up afterwards to provide you with some resource materials you can consult afterwards. So this being said, I'm going to just take you through the agenda. So just quickly letting you know that the concept of foresight is introduced in this webinar to provide you with an understanding of how foresight can be used within this topic of skills anticipation. The webinar and what I'm gonna try to do is to detail when and how this methodology is useful and introduce you also to the various Foresight methods and procedures. In a nutshell, Foresight can help you with policy making in anticipation of skills needs to make better decisions and support planning, and that's the main aim for Foresight. It's a set of very helpful tools for education, policy planning, in times of very rapid change, in times of when we're trying to understand change, and it allows engagement with a broad range of stakeholders if you have a complex stakeholder environment, and engaging them in meaningful discussion about not only what we think education might become, but also what we want education to become. So in our agenda today, I'm gonna go through Foresight and what it is and how to use it in skills. I'm gonna also give you an overview of Foresight tools and methods and a comparative review of what exists. I'm gonna take you through the process of implementing Foresight programs in general, and then we're gonna dig deeper into one case of the use of Foresight and skills anticipation. Those of you who are very interested in using and implementing the methodology, this Foresight tools for skills, should refer to this document, the volume 2 of the guide to anticipating and matching skills and job, and it's on developing skills, foresights, scenarios, and forecasts. This volume intends to show how Foresight can be implemented and adapted to local needs. And there are annexes in the guide that would provide you with examples of implementation of Foresight that have been used in various country settings. So this guide aims to provide countries, that's what the aim, what it was published, it helps countries which are starting to develop systems of skills needs anticipation with information on different aspects and methodologies of Foresight, as well as ways to model and forecast skills needs. The main purpose of this guide is to address the following 2 questions. Why undertake skills foresighting and forecasting, what can be done and how to proceed. So if you're really interested in the topic, I suggest you consult this guide. I would share it after this webinar as a follow-up with the recording of the webinar. The guide is focusing on time horizon of 5 to 20 years in terms of skills foresight and forecasting, and it's either applied at national level covering the whole economy, or and also at the sector level covering primarily one or more sectors within the economy. It's very self-standing and self-explanatory document and very practice-focused and step-by-step approach. So I will really invite you to consult this document if you're very interested in digging deeper in the topic. Without further waiting, we're gonna dig into the topic. So I'm gonna start by explaining basically what is Foresight. And the term Foresight, I don't know if you heard about it and if you heard already people talking about the topic or you've seen it in literature, but the term Foresight is nowadays widely used, especially over the past 20 years. It could be defined as a systematic future intelligence gathering and medium to long-term vision building process aimed at identifying opportunities and areas of vulnerability to assist present-day decision-making. So basically, it's a process that is put in place to actually facilitate and guide and inform decision-making. So, in a nutshell, Foresight is a qualitative approach versus quantitative approach in statistics. And it's quite often confused with forecasting, extrapolation, or planning, while it does not have the same meaning, because it's not a forecasting system. We're not trying to predict the future. We're gonna try to write scenarios and then aim to draft a strategy to go towards these scenarios. And then the key element in Foresight activities is that they're action-oriented, in the sense that the final aim is to influence and shape and act upon the future. The processes and outputs should be oriented towards contributing to and facilitating and guiding the decision-making process. So just taking you through how the Foresight activity chain goes through. Basically, we are from the first stage, if I look at the very, very beginning of that process, which is reality and gathering information about reality, and then at the very, very last and the end of that process, which is the strategy and what and how do we do that. So basically, we go from what is the state of art nowadays and on the present time to drafting a strategy to go on towards the future we want. And in the middle of these two milestones, we have several steps we need to go through, meaning we would start by mapping the current state. We will collect information, we'll analyze this information, we will understand the factors and drivers of change, and then we will try to understand them. So we will interpret these information, we will try to understand the state of art and to make this information have meaningful and have sense, to then try to draw from this information and from understanding these drivers of change and this change to different perspectives. So we will try to draw different scenarios, different possible and plausible scenarios, and develop them to be able to understand and to decide and to go through an arbitrage and to pick one of these scenarios of what should be done, what do we want to go. And from there, once we chose a preferred scenario, we would go and draft a strategy to how we're going to achieve that scenario. So it's a pretty straightforward process. It goes from being at a state in a present time and looking at a state in a future time, and basically trying to bridge that gap between present and future, but in a very evidence-based and action-based process. Please feel free at any time of the presentation, and I just say it again, to write me questions so that we gather them at the end and we address them. So moving forward, Foresight is not a one-shot activity, but it's part of a continuous evaluation. The results of every Foresight should be reflected in strategy and implemented in relevant areas. However, assessment and subsequent analysis should follow implementation of the strategy to ensure feedback and thus contribute to intended development. So if you look at this chart, you would see that we would undertake all the analysis stage of understanding the state, and then we will go through the Foresight exercise as a second step. Then we will draw our strategy over here. We would implement our strategy, and then we would assess the implementation to feed again what is the new state and do that that exercise again if needed to be. So at first, and when this process and when there was huge interest in Foresight, the initiatives focused on technology and its social and economic impact. So we would look at what are the changes in the world in terms of technology and what are the drivers of change, and what this technology and these drivers of change are going to take the world, and then we draw different scenarios of what the world would look like technologically wise. But a new generation Foresight have dealt also with demographic change or health or social welfare, energy, transport, environment, climate change, community development, culture, human resources, and skills anticipation and education. So yes, if you see and look online, you would see a lot of interest looked at what is use of foresight in technology. But for the past years, there is a new use for this tools and methodologies for different purposes, including skills anticipation and education. So, moving on to comparing and understanding what are the different foresight methods. And through this section, I will try to provide you with the detailed description and typologies of foresight methods and approaches of foresight applications. I'll try to explain how these methods are used, what the features are, and what are the pros and cons of using particular methods if you're planning into using foresight in your context. Why we are going through this comparative analysis? Well, because when you are choosing an adequate method, it's really critical which method you're going to use. And through this choice, it appears that often it's based on what's fashionable. So what future or foresight tool is used more than the other. And usually, if you read case studies, you will tend to go through all of this contexts like ours. So we're gonna move towards we're gonna use this methodology rather than another methodology. I would insist that it's necessary to be able to distinguish among particular methods and determine which one is appropriate to use and decide how this method should be applied. You could use one method and you could adapt it to your context. There is no particular solution really or method that can be used for all problems. Usually in foresight work, we combine several methods, and usually that helps the exercise to have more meaning for the very particular context of the country. So different problems and contexts require different configurations of foresight approach, and it's necessary to be familiar with foresight methods. But more important is to know the specific and economic, institutional, and social background of your own country to be able to pick the right tool to perform your foresight exercise. So, to start, depending on the aim and the nature of the result you aspire to, foresight methodologies can be split up into several categories. The first one is the exploratory methods, and these methods are basically they start from the present with an attempt to see where events and trends might take us by exploring what-if scenarios. So we start from the present and go to the future, and we draw scenarios to look at different futures. This means that exploratory methods start with the preconditions, beliefs, and social or technological possibilities which already exist. So we would start from the present and ask, like you see in the chart, what could happen if this event happens. So we studied what are the changes in our context, and we would basically withdraw what are the impacts of these changes, and from the impacts of these changes we would try to draw different scenarios of impacts. This is the exploratory method. So we would start from a current change, a present change, and we would explore basically its impact that would give us different outcomes. The second methodology, the second typology of method. The second method, sorry. Kindly mute yourselves during the presentation just to avoid to have some backup noise. Thank you so much. Okay, so moving on with the second typology, which is normative methods. And these methods start with a vision of a possible desirable future and work backwards to see if and how this future might be achieved or avoided given the existing constraint. So basically, we have a vision of the future, what we want to achieve, a desirable future or a non-desirable future, and we walk back from that outcome And we tried to draw the different steps that would take us back to our present. So we basically creating a plan of different steps in a process from a desirable future to our present day. This is, if you notice, this is the exact opposite what we try to do with the exploratory, where we start from present to future. So we've seen the exploratory methods from present to future. These are the normative methods, so the future to present. And then there are supplementary methods. And here I'm gonna look at this chart, which is called the diamond, the future diamond, the Foresight diamond. And this regroups the different Foresight methods. It's another way to classify methods by considering their ability to gather or process information based on evidence, on expertise, on interaction, or on creativity. These are the four. If you look at the chart, the four settings that are used to regroup these methods. So the attributes, so these four attributes are the building blocks of what we call the Foresight diamond, which I just presented. The diamond does not imply the combination of methods, but shows which attributes prevail in a particular method. So, for instance, I'm gonna take the case of backcasting, and backcasting here is, like you see in the chart, is a normative method. So backcasting looks at, it's a method that would look at the future from a desirable future and work backwards. So backcasting, go from the future to the present. And this, why this methodology is classified between creativity and expertise, because to start off you need a set of, it has two attributes. So you have to be working creatively with your stakeholders in order to actually take from the desirable future and be able to break down this outcome and how to work back to the present. You need a lot of expertise to do so. You need to understand what are the different attributes of your environment, either technological, political, or environmental, etc., that would impact on this outcome. And you need to be able to be creative enough to actually draw different ways back to getting to your present day. So the Foresight diamonds here describes methods from the perspective of how they are created and developed, and which attributes are determinants of a particular method applied. I would take also the example of scenarios here, which is considered as a creative activity. Well, obviously it is a creative activity. It's closer to the peak of creativity if you look at it in the Foresight diamond, even though the inputs of these scenarios are mostly evidence. So you would have scenarios that would be evidence-based. So we would take from, if you think about scenarios which are exploratory, we would start from the present, we would understand the state, and we would draw from these state, we will draw drivers of change, and we would try to explain them and look at their impact. So it's more evidence-based. But since it is a activity that requires some creativity to actually project yourself in the future and try to draw several plausible and possible futures, so it's closer to creativity. So this Foresight diamonds, it acknowledges the core activity when processing the method. So not inputs nor outputs of a particular method. You can, through the guide, the Foresight diamond, it's present in the guide that I mentioned in the very beginning, the volume 2 on developing foresight and forecasting for skills. Every single method in this diamond is explained step by step, and it's very straightforward. It explains how this method is applied, etc., etc. For today, I'm just gonna take a few examples here, just to explain like one main most famous, let's say, methodologies. I'm gonna start with the exploratory here, and scenarios is one of the most well-known and most cited as a useful technique for thinking about the future. So in Foresight project, the scenario method is more a policy analysis tool that helps to describe a possible set of future conditions. So the scenario method is also often used within quantitative forecast projects to analyze and describe the outcomes of skills forecast. So this is why in the very beginning I mentioned that foresight can be confused with forecast, which is not the case, because we would here take the skills forecast and we try to describe their outcomes and use a method like scenarios to go from the forecast to develop scenarios and to try to work towards a strategy. The main contribution of the scenarios methodology is helping the decision makers to consider possible options and to choose the preferred vision for future policy decisions. It motivates creative thinking beyond the usual, short-term perspective. So the four scenarios you see here in the screen, they were used by the Australian Workforce and Productivity Agency back in 2013 to determine what the key drivers of demand and supply are in the Australian labor market, to look at 2025 and which scenarios should be considered, and to work on their skills and education policy. So these are the four different scenarios they came up with, and the intention is that by comparing these alternative scenarios, the significance of different uncertainties can be better appreciated. So, for instance, I would take the smart recovery. So we would have one uncertainty is the geopolitics of the region, just saying, like taking one uncertainty, and here you could compare it and draw different scenarios depending on the geopolitical situation, and you could have one scenario taking one possibility each. So a comparison of the model results based on these scenarios, they helped to identify how much difference possible alternative future developments are likely to make to the demands for different skills, plus the why also, and what responses might then be most appropriate. When developing these scenarios, the key question was, what are the key drivers of demand and supply for skills in the Australian labor market to 2025? So you would find these four scenarios, the mini, let's say, mini description on each scenario, if you are interested in this case, on the Australian workforce, and you would be able to read them in that guide I mentioned in the beginning, which will be shared with you at the end of this webinar. Moving on to normative methods, and as I mentioned, backcasting is a normative method, so it would work from a desirable future and work back to the current state, like you see in the chart. And this one is one of the most used normative method, and is used in complex situations where there is a normative objective and fundamentally uncertain future events that influence these objectives. So backcasting defines a desirable future and then works backwards to identify major events and decisions that generated the future, to consider what actions, policies, and programs are needed today that will connect the future to the present. So backcasting reminds participants, when you are in a foresight exercise, that the future is not linear and it can have many alternative outcomes depending on decisions made and the impact of external events on an organization. So this is, I think, the backcasting and the whole notion of having different desired futures, and the notion of having different scenarios. This is very strong because it shows that depending on several our action and decision and the policies we would put in place in the present, the outcome could be completely different, and we are going towards a completely different future. So this chart, as this chart shows, backcasting comprises several actions needed to achieve a desirable output. Basically, the method, it consists of 4 steps, like any Foresight methodology, but this backcasting and the normative method are a bit particular because they go from the future and try to look back. So first step would be defining the problem or context, or framing your challenges, and this involves bounding the problem context, setting the assumptions, identifying stakeholders, considering scale issues, and so on. And this is also, I want to say, it's common to all methodologies. We try to frame our challenges and to try to identify and clarify the problem and context. Then comes the step 2, which is characterizing the desirable futures, and this focuses on construction of visions of desirable futures. This is why when we saw in the Foresight diamond that backcasting was in expertise and creativity, because it requires some creativity to actually creating these scenarios. These futures reflect the values and wishes of the stakeholders and where we want to go. Now, step 3 would be backcasting the trajectories from future to present, because as soon as these desired futures are designed, the trajectories are backcast from future to the present. And backcast trajectories are typically described in terms of first order, like economic, social, technological, and institutional milestones and changes. Once the trajectories are identified, we move on to the next step, which would be to identify the interventions to initiate the trajectory. So once we go back to our current state, we would be looking at which actually is our desired future, and we would know what are the different steps to go there. So backcasting provides us with a framework for identifying the interventions or actions in terms of policy and strategy measures that we will require to implement the trajectories which would lead us to the desirable future. Again, if you have any question, please feel free to use the chat and write them down. So now, one more common methodology I want to say is brainstorming, and I believe everyone knows what is brainstorming. It's one of the most creative methods and is often used at early stages of foresight activities. It's usually prior to scenario buildings or within SWOT analysis. So brainstorming is used in many activities, many training activities, but we also use it for foresight work. It's often used in the initial phases of the foresight projects to gather a wide pool of ideas to identify main future trends and to identify key issues that should be in the scope of the further research in the next stages. It may be also used as a means of assessing and interpreting the results in a later stage of the process. And this is how it was used by the Institute of the Future. I don't know if people here know a little bit about the Institute for the Future. It's the California-based institute, and they work on writing scenarios and how they have a platform to mainstream the future thinking and mainstream making people think about the future. And they have open platform where they run events and sometimes online exercises and games to ask people to brainstorm the future. So the Institutes for the Future, I give an example, during their future work on Skills 2020 project, after the some pieces of intelligence were gathered while drawing on some of their previous foresight exercises and their signals methodologies, a group of experts was brought together to participate in the brainstorming exercise. So it was after the foresight exercise after the foresight exercise happened. So They were experts from various fields and with diverse professional backgrounds, and their task during the brainstorming was to identify key drivers of change and how these will shape future skill requirements. So in the next step of the Foresight work, the outcomes were further analyzed and filtered, and the final 6 key drivers and 10 skills areas for the next decade were determined. So I don't know if you know the map of the Skills 2020 of the Institute of the Future. I thought it was really interesting to mention it because if you're looking at what are the future skills for 2020, even 2030, they push also the work to the next decade, you would see that they they worked with a very evidence-based process to actually define 10 skills that would be the skills for 2020. Okay, so brainstorming is one other methodology that could be used in Foresight work. Now, just moving on to what are the key steps in implementing the Foresight programs. And here we will just it's very, let's say, straightforward and pretty clear, because we would start with thinking about a future, about a Foresight program, and to see if it can provide the kind of information we want and fulfill expectations. So what role can a Foresight exercise play in a meeting, in meeting key social challenges for our stakeholders? What are the main motives for Foresight should be enriching the understanding of circumstances and potential strategies to bring us to our desired future. Also, employing Foresight activities may not be always appropriate. So if the purpose is to bring quantifiable knowledge of future skill needs, Foresight is perhaps not suitable. Maybe projections or extrapolating activities can produce desired outputs and provide robust data, and have, like, we use these quantitative methods. So the first thing is to define what is the area for Foresight and what are we considering to be 100% sure that this is the way forward. So once the focus of the Foresight exercise is clear and decision to proceed is taken, a number of important issues need to be planned. So, for instance, objectives, expected outcomes, Foresight time horizon, partners, stakeholders, participants, scope, methods, many more, like formats to apply, time, resources, etc., etc. So selecting an appropriate methodology should be done early in the Foresight design process. The chosen methodology should be problem-solving driven and result-oriented. It should also take into account feasibility of the implementation and resources, needs, and constraints. You should always aim for a Foresight methodology that would be actually realizable. So here, resources meaning availability of time, especially your stakeholders. If you have the money or the expertise to run this exercise, including a facilitator if you need one. If you have the venue, the equipment, etc., etc. So here, the Foresight implementation plan has to include a number of organizational issues. Such as forming the implementation team and assigning roles and responsibilities to its member. So you have to have a team. So we have to have a team of working on the Foresight exercise, a team working on the pre-Foresight exercise, and a team on the post-Foresight exercise. And actually, the implementation does not have to be related to that team that would work on the Foresight exercise. So moving on, so step 3 would be clarify the key program and design elements. Step 4, the key questions and the way to find answers. Step 5, manage the Foresight exercise, and here again, if we have the facilitator, here will the person intervene, and then ensuring the use of result. So if you see this loop, is really within the step we saw in the value in the chain we saw in the beginning. This would come in the Foresight exercise. This is how we would run a Foresight exercise. So I'm running a little bit out of time. I'm going to take 5 minutes and then give the floor to for you to have to send in your questions and to answer questions. But I'm going to take 5 minutes to quickly go through this case study on foresight and skills of the European Union. And basically, the name of the project is Foresight for Skills 21, and the project was to support enlargement countries, the list is here, in their human resources development efforts. And the overall objective was here to assist the countries to develop the skills of their people for sustainable economic development and social cohesion in the medium and long-term perspective. So Foresight for Skills 2020 in the enlargement countries aims at informing the programming process and contributing to best use of funds. Sorry. So the main questions that the Foresight exercise here made to answer is which skills should the country, and here because all these countries were supposed to go through this exercise, the question is which skills should the country develop towards 2020, and how can these skills be generated by the education and training system. So the project was run from 2014 to 2020, and basically enlargement countries, so the list I showed before, needed to ensure a more coherent and evidence-based policy approach to human resource development and an improved institutional and interinstitutional cooperation, and thus a more strategic approach for developing a vision for human resource development was needed to be adopted. So a qualitative approach here, which is Foresight, was and will be, because 2014-2020 some countries already run through this exercise, and they run, at least in the case where you will read in that document, there are 2 countries who went through this Foresight exercise, and basically the Foresight is applied to developing a vision for Skills 2020 in the country, and taking broad issues and trends into account and building on existing evidence. So they already worked what data they had, and they tried to extrapolate, and I think they've been using exploratory methods to work on this project. And in the document you will see that they use also scenarios. So the main objectives here were to reinforce, strengthen, and build capacity within the institution of the country. So breaking down the silos, improve the communication between institutions. It was also to promote a more future-oriented approach to skills policies, and here to pay attention to key stakeholders, i.e. private sector and civil society, sorry, which may not have been sufficiently engaged in the development of the strategies before. And then flagging key concerns in relation to skills, in particular the mismatch between demand and supply of skills in the labor market, and then to promote capacity building in the human resources development policy cycle with regard to the EU support and what they're providing. So the approach basically is it's what any Foresight and methodology or exercise would be characterized by, is a systematic approach. So it's a very process driven. It's a participatory one. It gathers a wide range of stakeholders. It's a future intelligence gathering. So it studies trends and drivers and their interactions, etc. It's vision building because it explores alternative scenarios and supports the eventual focus on a common vision. And then it's shaping decision making because it empowers the stakeholders, participants to the foresight exercise to move beyond just exploring to shaping the future they want to see. And then it mobilizes action because by engaging stakeholders, it supports the pathway for effective policy implementation through joined up approaches. And here again, going back to the idea of strengthening institutional organizations, etc. So I'm gonna go quickly through the process. So there is a pre-foresight phase, system building, foresight proper, and follow-up. I will send in these this presentation so you could have a deeper look into step by step how do we run and what are the tasks we perform when running a future exercise, a foresight exercise. And here you would see that there's a lot of prep work, but there's a lot of facilitation work, and there's a lot of engaging stakeholders in the conversation work. So what the EU, or what these tests on the two countries learned, are this lesson one is that the process design for foresight needs to be tailored to the specific framework conditions in each country, in each case. So don't think that you could just take one example, or you are similar in a country similar to another country, and we could just extrapolate and take a solution, or if like the outputs of foresight exercise, and just work with a strategy that was dragged from that exercise. There are many variations and differences in the institutional setup and the timeliness of the exercise compared to other processes. So you should always aim for a personalized foresight exercise. The vision building process may involve much wider group, including large parts of the business community and civil society. But when it comes to setting priorities in elaborating the details of a roadmap, small groups of decision makers and experts may work most efficiently. And here, this is what we learned is like you need to mobilize relevant stakeholders for each step. Maybe for different, and what take us to the next lesson, which is working with employers and then working also with small companies, engage them in the conversation. Here, it's at different stages of the foresight exercise. You may want to talk to institutions rather than other institutions, or private sector and civil society, etc. So here also it's important, what is important is to scope the foresight question. So with a clear thematic focus for the process, and because addressing skills as such is like using a wide angle lens. While this has advantages in terms of coherence, you can't just look at the exercise from one lens. So you should aim for specific, maybe sector-specific exercise, or region-specific exercise. Maybe narrow it to a region in the country, etc., etc. So this been said, thank you so much. I'm sorry I took so much time. I really wanted to make it clear, because it's very critical to know what's the difference between the different methods. There are so many out there, so that to make it easy and simple, and to make it easy to digest, it's very important for you if you're running or planning to run a foresight exercise. I'm gonna just look quickly at the questions that already some people asked. And of course, I will engage colleagues in this conversation. These questions I'm gonna follow up by email and ask colleagues to give us more technical answers, because as I mentioned in the beginning, I've been working on foresight as a facilitator, and I was trained to be a foresight facilitator, but maybe I'm not the person to answer very technical questions on skills anticipation. I would be able to animate and facilitate a foresight exercise, but I'm not the expert, so I'm a different stakeholder, let's say. So what I'm gonna do is Okay, so we need practical tools that would help us to proceed. All right, so I see that some of the participants here and people in the crowd are already planning to use use Foresight to proceed and to work on envisioning the future. So in my follow-up email, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you our Foresight Toolkit, which is a set of tools and basically a set of facilitation tools from the different ones I mentioned in the Foresight Diamond. Basically, for instance, scenarios and backcasting would each have a facilitation guide for the person performing the Foresight exercise, and for a more, let's say, a bigger scope in how to engage your stakeholders, etc. I'm gonna share with you the work with the European Training Foundation, which is the institution that is also in Torino, and that is of course, and that has been working on really putting the process and framework for this project, specifically Future Skills 2020. This guide is very comprehensive and explains how you would start from the very early stage of the pre-Foresight exercise and to how to follow up with your stakeholders and how to make sure that the implementation and assessment are performed. Our Foresight at our Foresight Toolkit that's in the International Training Center is very much focused on facilitating the Foresight exercise and how to use the methodologies, but that guide would be more comprehensive in terms of how to plan and how to make sure the exercises, the outputs of the exercise implemented and assessed. And also the volume 2 I presented here is more specific to skills and gives you more examples of countries and country case studies. So this being said, I'm sorry I didn't have the time to take any questions, but this is the opportunity for me to take these questions as my homework and take them to my colleagues in ILO Geneva and the skills department. And these colleagues will be more suited, I believe, to answer the questions very technical on skills anticipation. Also, I believe if you stay in touch with the training center and its news, you'll be able to either participate to one of the skills development academy or the skills anticipation courses, which is one every year or every second year. So if you're interested, feel free to write me. And this being said, I'm gonna just give the floor to Sylvia, maybe to close. And
Thank you so much, Fatma. Thank you very much for this session, very inspiring session. It was very useful. As you said, unfortunately, time is limited, but for participants who are interested to develop more the session, develop more the topic, they can contact me. They can contact also Unimed, and we can definitely put in contact with Fatma. Unimed is interested to continue this collaboration, and maybe why not organizing other webinar training session in the future. So we will send it to you, all the materials, as Fatma said at the beginning of the webinar, and we will stay in touch for their training, for their activities. I thank again Fatma and the ETC Center and all the participants who joined today, this afternoon, and stay with us till the end. Thank you again, and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having attended, and I will follow up with Sylvia, and we follow up with recording and with related materials for you to dig in deeper in this topic. Thank you so much again, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you again.